So the presidential primaries are really heating up right now on the Democratic side. A lot of people have announced: Elizabeth Warren, Tulsi Gabbard, Kamala Harris, Amy Klobuchar, Kirsten Gillibrand. There's a lot of excitement happening right now, and of course, one of the biggest news and something I'm very excited for is Bernie Sanders going to announce his candidacy imminently. But that's not quite here what we're here to talk about today. The Democratic race, I think, is going to be very interesting in broad terms. You know, who's got the chance to win, who's going to, how the vote splits are going to happen, how does the delegate math play out. All of that's very interesting. Today, I want to talk a bit about how, even though we're only a few weeks into this marathon process, there needs to be some discussion about this conflict between the billionaire class and two particular candidates, and that's Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. Now, I'm sure we've all seen the story, I believe it was in Politico, where they basically interviewed a few of the financial elite, some billionaires, some Wall Street types, and they had a discussion basically centered around the fact that a lot of the financial elite in the country, in the United States, are displeased with Trump. I'm sure that they're happy with a lot of the tax cuts he's given them, that the Republican Congress, the Republican House and Senate has done a lot of the things that the elite want. So they're probably happy in that sense, but Trump is extremely volatile. His positions on things like tariffs are generally in opposition to the kind of neoliberal consensus that has existed in both the Republican and Democratic parties, that is kind of the ideology of that business elite. And I think that there's a worry that Trump's volatility is just not something that's ideal. And that, yeah, the highs might be higher under Trump than under a kind of centrist Democratic president like, say, Hillary Clinton, but that the steady stewardship of someone like Barack Obama is something that they have great value in. So a lot of the elite are looking to the Democrats. But as that article noted, there's two people in particular that they don't want to see win. And I think we can guess who those people are. One of them is, of course, Elizabeth Warren, Massachusetts senator, scholar, relatively new to the national political scene, yet very popular among the left. And of course, Bernie Sanders, a much longer political career, much longer kind of seen as this voice on the left, even before the left had any kind of mainstream clout. And of course, most famous of all for his rather inspiring run for the Democratic nomination in 2016. Now, I think it's really important to talk about how the elites in this story basically say it can't be them. It can't be Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren. They're not writing off pretty much anybody else. And, there are notable differences. I don't want to suggest that, that you can't have a debate about how Kamala Harris offers a distinct political vision from somebody like Kirsten Gillibrand, who I think they both offer something rather distinct from, a likely candidate in Joe Biden. I think that it's fair to say that Kamala Harris is at least sympathetic to a Medicare for All option, whether or not she'll ultimately embrace it, while Joe Biden has been rather closed off to the idea. Now, none of that is to say that those policy differences don't matter. But it is to say that the elite can fit them all under a broad umbrella, a broad, acceptable umbrella. They could do that with a lot of Republicans as well, but they can't do that with Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. And frankly, from my perspective, that only seems to raise their profile. Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren have value in and of themselves, but in our times, with the inequality we see, with the sheer hedonism of the American 1% and the 0.1% and the 0.01%, anybody who scares them as much as Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren seem to be scaring them is at least worth a look from the left. At least deserves the left's attention. And I think it's very clear. Bernie Sanders has made the job almost more difficult for himself this time around, because he's mainstreamed a lot of the ideas that he held before. Medicare for All isn't necessarily Democratic Party policy, but it is now a kind of position that people have to at least be seen making a nod to. You can't be Hillary Clinton in 2016 saying that, Medicare for All is a unicorn policy that will never ever pass, and then win the Democratic primary by 4 million votes. It's likely going to be the case that you're going to have to to make significant rhetorical, if not, concrete nods to the left-wing voters in that primary if you're going to want to win. Unless you're somebody like Joe Biden, perhaps, who is going to run on a definitively centrist platform. Now, it's key that those things have been mainstreamed, but not everything has been mainstreamed. One of the factors is that Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders have been pushing significant tax increases, not just on income. As important as that is, again, a lot of the discussion from Ocasio-Cortez that she's been bringing up, we talked about this last episode, of course, is based on this idea of raising the top marginal tax rate. Raising it so that if you make over $10 million, then, every dollar after that $10th million is going to be taxed at 70%. But part of the problem with that is that wealth is already locked in. People have already made money off a rigged game. And when we only tax income going forward, it's sort of like saying to the very elite, their thievery, their avarice, their wanton disregard for workers' rights, for the environment, for the rights of migrant people, for workers in many developing nations who have been pillaged by these corporations, that we can't just allow them to get away with it. There needs to be consequences. And one of the ways you can do that is through a wealth tax. And Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren have both proposed wealth taxes. Elizabeth Warren proposed one last week or so, in the last little bit, where she would effectively raise taxes on the richest Americans, in the people making with wealth above 50 million, upwards of $1 billion, and then, adding a kind of 1% and rising wealth tax. Doesn't sound like a lot, but if you're talking about tens or hundreds or hundreds of millions or billions of dollars, it's a significant amount of money. Some estimates I've seen have said that they would raise, both Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren's tax, on wealth would raise well over $100 billion. It's not necessarily a huge chunk of change in the grand scheme of the American economy, but this just isn't about raising money for the programs we need. That's part of it. It's 100% part of it. People are going to ask Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Here in Canada, often we would be asked, how are we going to pay for the social programs we want? And part of the answer has to be a frank and unabashed and courageous statement that we are going to take that money from the rich. And you could talk about, are we sapping the initiative of the truly exceptional? But again, as I spoke in last episode, we are in a society rife with class conflict. So we need to kind of say that we are embracing the class conflict that's been levied against us for centuries. And now we are going to use our democratic will to take what the workers have produced. It's not just about raising the money to pay for the programs we need, the programs that workers deserve, the programs that children deserve, the programs that our elderly deserve, the programs that marginalized populations deserve. It's about building a society that lines up with some of the ideals of small L liberal societies. And I'm not a liberal. I'm a democratic socialist. I define myself as that pretty stridently. But, the ideals of liberalism have value. And when I say liberalism here, I mean small L liberalism, meaning that, most Republicans and Democrats, most liberals and conservatives in Canada are small L liberals. And there's a few things of liberalism that have some value. One of those is this idea that all people are supposedly created equal. And of course, the early American Republic, of course, the early days of Canada, we could say that while, not allowing women the right to vote, while enslaving people literally, while in both Canada and the United States committing a project of cultural and biological genocide against indigenous peoples. But there was that ideal. And that ideal was radical. Because in many parts of the world, in much of Europe, the idea was very clearly that people were not created equal. That some people were just plain better. They're just plain better than everybody else. By virtue of their birth. What made America special, again hypothetically, was that it didn't matter if you were a rich man that owned a lot of property, and it didn't matter if you were an immigrant. As long as you were a citizen of that country, you had these inalienable rights. You had the equality based on this shared humanity. And it also ties into this broad concept which remains extremely popular, and that's the idea of equality of opportunity. But the reality is, our system, with such inherent inequalities of wealth, cannot have equality of opportunity. It doesn't exist in Canada or the United States. It's probably never existed. It is a founding lie of liberal democratic societies like Canada and the United States. Probably throw in New Zealand and Australia in there. These countries weren't founded on equality of opportunity. It's never existed. And one of the reasons, there's many reasons, misogyny, genocide, racism, colonialism, etc. But one of the reasons is sheer inequality of wealth. Because while the supposed value of these new world societies, these former British colonies that went their own way, either through peaceful transition of power or through revolution in the case of the United States, was that in these countries, your royal blood didn't make you special. The duke or the count or the earl or the baron or what have you didn't have special power over you. Nobody was better than anybody else. But as we know, that's not true. And it's been called out for a long time. Thomas Jefferson long worried, again, he worried about the dangers of an entrenched economic elite, that such high levels of intergenerational wealth creates a situation in which there is no real equality of opportunity, and the power can be consolidated generation after generation after generation, both through the money itself, but also through the things money can buy, the influence money can buy, the connections money can buy, how two wealthy families can marry into one another and create more wealth and more connections. And it's a reality that FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, would call economic royalism. He would call the elite of his time the economic royalists. In many ways, he kind of was one, but they were economic royalists. Because the United States, of course, didn't have a landed gentry. They didn't have a landed nobility who passed on title from generation to generation, and who, by virtue of their dukedom or their their county, maintained this kind of wealth and privilege over the plain-blooded masses. But it did have, and it had increasingly, a small group of very wealthy people who could use their money and the influence that money provided to create multi-generational kind of empires, and use that influence to subvert the democratic will of the people and subvert the principles of equality of opportunity. And today we see this because financial elite don't seem to want any chance of the people asserting these basic values. The basic value that everyone needs medicine, that education should not be contingent upon, your family's bank account, that the elite should not have, our grand political discourse as their personal playground, that the ill-gotten gains of the past should not just be protected for perpetuity from, wealth taxation, from taxation other than kind of income going forward. And this is why I think that Politico article really hammered home this fear, this nearly existential fear. God, it can't be Bernie. God, what if it's Bernie? What if it's Liz? Like, what are we going to do? Like, what are we going to do if they win? We're going to have to pay our fair share in taxes. People will roam the streets with adequate health care, and children will go to school and have a good school, even if their parents didn't. It's horror to them. And this is in part why you're going to see, I think, some billionaires line up behind centrist Democrats, because they know that they need a situation where it's Trump versus a dependable centrist option, because they sort of win either way. If Trump wins again, they do get probably a continuation of the kind of general Republican policies. The volatility will be there, but they'll get a general kind of pro-business Republican policy, anti-labor laws, probably another Supreme Court justice who will prevent any kind of progressive reforms from coming in. It'll be for their benefit. But a centrist Democrat winning not only gets rid of Trump's volatility, but it creates this lesson perhaps that, well, the antidote to Trump wasn't Bernie Sanders, it really was Hillary Clinton all along. It was just a fluke. We don't need to learn anything from the past 2 or 3 years. Let's just go back to feeling like it was 2007 and, things are great. But if that doesn't work, and this is what's very interesting, is you have billionaires like Michael Bloomberg, and perhaps more explicitly in recent days, Howard Schultz, saying that he would run as a sort of independent, centrist candidate, and sort of hinting that they would only do so if one of the undesirable Democrats won. Only do so if Bernie or Liz won. And to me, that's very telling. It's telling me that they are willing to sort of work to distort the democratic process. And I know technically they have the right to run. It's not anything illegal. But to kind of distort the spirit of the process, to run in such a manner that would split a Democratic vote, just to stop somebody being a progressive alternative to Trump. And if that doesn't tell you what billionaires think of you, not just on economic issues, but of billionaires just to stop Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders from raising taxes on the rich and building social programs that offer to regular people what the rich have always enjoyed and will probably continue to enjoy, even if the top marginal tax rate is 90%, and even if a wealth tax is 10, 15, 20, 25, 30%, it doesn't matter. Heck, even Bernie's new proposal, a 77% estate tax on the richest American estates, won't, ultimately create a major dent in their ability to live just the most opulent, decadent, unearned lifestyle, even with the Sanders and Warren proposals. The reality is they're willing to throw everyone under the bus to protect that gold, to ensure that they can maintain a kind of Scrooge McDuck-like pile of money they can jump into. They're willing to throw workers under the bus. They're willing to throw marginalized people who are, just ripped apart under a kind of Trumpian Republican regime. Migrant peoples, people of color, religious minorities, trans people. Some billionaires, maybe they say, I'm a social progressive. I support those people. My company treats GLBTQ plus people with great respect. But if you're willing to sacrifice those people upon your altar of wealth and get Trump reelected just because you are bitter that Joe Biden or Kamala Harris or Kristen Gillibrand or Cory Booker or Beto O'Rourke ended up losing to Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren, and you don't like the pick on that side, that you're going to spoil the contest, well, that tells me that your wealth is worth more than millions and millions and millions of people's lives and dignity. And that's shameful. So I want to tell people this. I'm not an American, as I've noted before. I'm a Canadian citizen. I can't vote in this process. But my answer to people is to call the billionaire bluff. Don't listen to their fear-mongering. Don't listen to Howard Schultz tell you that Medicare for all is impossible, or that a 70% tax increase will hurt the country. Vote with your interests, and vote for a candidate. And right now it does appear to be that those two candidates are Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders. Consider both of those candidates, who are offering a vision that is striking terror in the hearts of those who have lived with such impunity for generations. Vote for the people who are fighting a class war against those who have started that class war. And vote, volunteer, donate to somebody who is fighting to build this sort of system that guarantees as a human right what the rich have always enjoyed. And finally, vote for a candidate, donate to a candidate, volunteer for a candidate who is trying to implement a democratic socialist vision that actually makes real the values that supposedly make countries like Canada and the United States so great. Values of equality, the values of universal human dignity. Values that don't just belong to a relatively privileged few, but that if we build a just economy, can belong to all of us. So I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Again, if you like this content, if you want to share it around, I really appreciate it. To like, comment, and subscribe. I want to hear what you think. Do you think that the billionaires are going to run a spoiler candidate if Warren or Sanders ends up winning the nomination? Do you feel that they have a particular candidate that they want to see on the Democratic side? What do you think the billionaire playbook is going to be during the next year of Democratic primaries? How do you feel they're going to influence the race directly and indirectly?